The moon is fat and lazy tonight. You walk slowly through a city that no longer exists, and yet, somehow, it always has. The cobbled streets of Delhi in the early 1300s whisper under your feet. A warm wind, smelling faintly of cardamom and distant fires, curls around your ankles. Somewhere nearby, a musician plays a one-stringed instrument, probably for no one but himself. The sound is thin, a little mournful, like a conversation with a cat who refuses to answer back. You pass by a bakery, if you can call it that. A man with arms dusted in flour kneads dough on a marble slab that once belonged to a noble's bathtub. The smell of warm bread seeps into your nose and then right into your soul. The air is thick, slow, like it's too tired to move. And honestly, who can blame it? A cheeky warning before we get too far. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because of danger, there's not much of that here, but because sleep tends to sneak up on people when wandering this old world. And that's okay. Your dreams deserve a history lesson too. If you're enjoying this journey so far, go ahead and gently nudge the like button. Subscribe if you'd like to travel through more sleepy tales. And do let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's comforting to imagine a constellation of sleepers dotted across the globe. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You're in the Delhi Sultanate. The year is 1325, and on the throne sits someone quite ... floral ... His name is Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and no one quite knows what to do with him. He is both brilliant and bewildering. A philosopher king who prefers poetry over policy, but also builds elaborate tax systems no one can understand, including him, some suspect. He's that type of ruler. The kind who might write an essay on metaphysics and then launch a disastrous economic experiment before lunch. You hear talk in the market. A storyteller at the chai stall says the Sultan recently paid a court poet entirely in perfume. Not coins, not gold. Bottles of rosewater, sandalwood essence, and a distillation of ambergris, which, yes, is technically whale vomit, but try telling that to a royal perfumer. The poet, who was apparently delighted, dabbed a bit on his wrists and went right on composing verses about sunsets and betrayal. Smelled fantastic doing it, too. And this wasn't a one-off. You begin to hear whispers of it again and again. Perfume payments, cents instead of salaries. You smell rich. Someone jokes in the background. Historians still debate whether this was common practice or just the Sultan being eccentric on a Tuesday. But one thing is certain: Muhammad bin Tughlaq didn't do anything halfway. He once tried to move the entire capital city twice in opposite directions. The sun begins to rise as you pass through the inner courts of the city. Merchants roll open fabric stalls, silks, cottons, brocades that shimmer like dragonfly wings. There's a pattern of peacocks stitched into one bolt of cloth so intricately it almost flutters when the wind shifts. You catch a waft of rose oil. Someone's been paid recently, just past the spice market. There's a public fountain that drips lazily into a worn stone basin. A boy dips his fingers in, then flicks water onto a stray dog asleep in the shade. The dog doesn't even blink. There's a strange stillness to the city at this hour, as if it's exhaling. And maybe you are too. By the way, the Sultan's favorite color, allegedly violet. It shows up a lot in royal orders. Violet robes, violet banners, a violet ink seal that somehow made tax demands look like love letters. And remember the storyteller from earlier? He's still talking. Now he's onto a poem about mangoes and destiny. You could stay here a while. You lean against a sun-warmed wall and close your eyes. You are now officially unpaid in Perfume, and surprisingly okay with it. You wake or half-wake to the sound of slow-moving hooves. Not the clatter of horses in a rush, but the measured plod of ceremonial elephants. You open one eye. They're painted, the elephants, not your eyes, though who knows anymore. Their foreheads are adorned with floral designs in chalky red and gold, and one has what might be a paisley moustache painted above its trunk. Royal parades in the Sultanate are unpredictable. Today, it seems, the Sultan is celebrating. Poets, again. A scroll has been unrolled from a palace balcony. A court crier reads a new royal decree with dramatic yawns between words. Apparently, every poet who submits a verse that includes the word do will receive a vial of imported musk. 2 verses with dew and swan. You get cinnamon, too. You feel bad for the archivist who has to record all this. The street smells incredible, like the inside of a spice merchant's dreams. Sandalwood and clove swirl with the scent of ink and wet parchment. A scribe nearby dips a reed pen into a pot of purple-black dye and mutters something about job security through confusion. You sit on the steps of a hammam and watch steam snake out through its carved vents. People are already inside, gossiping, in voices thick with sleep and eucalyptus. One man claims he once received a compliment from the Sultan himself. He said, "I had the toes of a philosopher." No one questions it, and maybe they shouldn't. Mohammed bin Tughlaq is not your average monarch. He's a collector of oddities and ideas. A man who once invited Greek philosophers, Chinese astrologers, and Persian mystics to court, sometimes all on the same day. Did any of them understand each other? That's up for debate. But it made for fascinating dinner parties. One obscure but entirely plausible cultural tidbit. The Sultan allegedly kept a bowl of sugared rose petals on his writing desk. Not to eat, just to smell when decisions got too heavy. You can't help but wonder what kind of legislation smells like Candide. Flowers, and there's something else. The coins. You notice a merchant angrily counting a pile of brass tokens. These are the infamous token currency, coins, cheap metal pieces meant to replace silver. The Sultan had this genius idea. Why not just make more money, literally? He minted brass and copper coins with royal stamps and declared them equal to silver. A beautiful idea, really, until everyone else started doing the same thing. Historians still debate whether the economic chaos that followed was due to poor enforcement or a collective national impulse to test the limits of logic. Either way, within a few months, even children were forging currency using bottle caps and prayer bowls. One enterprising monk printed money on dried mango slices. Delicious, but deflationary. You see a shopkeeper now refusing any coins at all. Payment only accepted in poetry or fine silks, which, in fairness, is how many college graduates are paid today. The morning thickens. A cart rolls by, piled high with papyrus and goatskin manuscripts. A young scholar sits atop them, legs swinging, nose in a book. He doesn't notice when one scroll falls off behind him and lands in a puddle. A street dog wanders over and sniffs it, unimpressed. Remember that street you passed earlier, the one with the flower vendor. It's back, though the vendor is gone. In his place, a quiet old man arranging vials of perfume on a wooden shelf. Labels in faded Persian. One says, "Rain on silk." Another, simply, "Melancholy." You ask what they cost. He looks you in the eye and says, "Only your attention." You nod like that means something. And maybe it does. You walk on, slower now, each step softened by dust and poetry. And somewhere, not far off, the Sultan is probably composing a decree about moonlight and tax reform. Asterisk. The day has stretched itself like a lazy cat across the palace courtyards. You walk beneath an archway that sighs with the weight of history, its once crisp carvings now soft around the edges. Like a memory retold too many times, a servant walks past you carrying a tray stacked with tiny glass bottles. One slips and shatters on the marble floor, releasing a sudden burst of orange blossom and something vaguely peppery. No one panics. The scent wafts into the hallway like a passing thought. Another servant appears with a cloth, muttering about perfume casualties as if this is a routine hazard of palace life. It probably is. You wander deeper into the inner courtyards of the Sultan's palace where the air grows quiet, plush, and strange. Here, gardens bloom in stone bowls. Ivy creeps across clay tiles. A peacock struts past you like it owns the place, which, in a very local sense, it probably does. And then you hear it. The sound of recitation. Poetry hour. It's not optional. A row of poets, some bearded, some barefoot, all slightly underfed, stand before a dais. Reading verse 2, a figure reclining under a silk canopy. That figure is Muhammad bin Tughlaq, eyes half shut, fingers laced together like he's praying to the muse of very specific compliments. One poet ends a sonnet with the phrase, "Her breath was saffron, her silence was the wind." The Sultan opens one eye. "Acceptable," he says, then tosses the man a small cloth pouch. The poet catches it. Inside, powdered nutmeg and a few strands of real saffron. He looks like he might cry. Historians still debate whether these rewards were meant a serious patronage, or if the Sultan was just building the world's most aromatic treasury. Some say he was trying to turn poetry into literal currency. Others suspect he just had an excellent sense of smell and too much time. Your attention drifts to a nearby mosaic wall. Its tiles are tiny, glimmering, 1,000 shades of blue. One obscure bit of cultural trivia. It's said that no two tiles in this section of the palace are the same shade. The Sultan believed that symmetry was a kind of lie. He preferred imperfection, claimed. It kept people humble, or maybe it just made renovations easier. A sleepy official strolls by holding a scroll twice his height. It unrolls behind him like a tail. When you glance at the top, it reads, "New municipal guidelines for fountain maintenance, as inspired by the moon." No further context provided. You pass through an open room that smells of old paper and cedar. This is the library, or perhaps the excuse for one. Rows of manuscripts line the walls, most handwritten, some illuminated with gold leaf, so delicate it shimmers even in the shadows. You overhear a scholar whispering to another, "He wants us to catalogue books by how they make us feel." That's not standard. Still, there's something tender about that. A catalogue of feelings instead of titles. Confusing, yes, but maybe not wrong. Someone offers you a cup of spiced milk. You sip it. It tastes like cinnamon and long naps. A nearby window lets in a warm breeze that carries the scent of cumin from the kitchens and a hint of jasmine from the courtyard vines. It's like being hugged by an herb garden in a quiet corner. An apprentice writes a poem on silk, not parchment, silk. When asked why, he shrugs and says, "The Sultan prefers it that way." He says ink deserves luxury. You nod solemnly. You've seen stranger policies today. You begin to feel the pull of slowness again, the kind that sinks into your limbs like molasses through a sieve. You're not tired, exactly, just perfumed into submission. Asterisk, you're back outside the palace, following a path shaded by neem trees and lined with marble benches. Their surfaces are worn smooth from centuries of royal bottoms and philosopher elbows. A pigeon watches you from a ledge, head tilted in vague suspicion. You nod at it like an old friend. Ahead, a group of students sits cross-legged on the grass, surrounded by scrolls and the occasional snack. A scholar with unruly eyebrows is explaining something about celestial maps using a bowl of lentils and a spoon. You sit nearby and pretend to understand. Everyone does. He points at the spoon. This is the moon. He points at the lentils. These are obstacles. Someone nods very wisely. The lesson continues. This is the Sultan's College of Ideas, a place where anyone can propose a theory, no matter how impractical. The walls are covered in sketches, flying machines, dream recording devices, an architectural plan for a spiral-shaped city that no one dares build. Yet, one fact that survives the centuries: Mohammed bin Tughlaq once opened his court to debates between theologians, mystics, and atheists. He encouraged contradiction. Sometimes, he assigned scholars to argue positions they didn't believe in. One poor man reportedly had to defend the theory that the moon was made of crushed almonds. The man is now a respected astrologer. Go figure, an obscure tidbit. The Sultan once commissioned a musical piece composed entirely for birds, live birds, in cages, singing on cue. It didn't go well, but it's remembered fondly, if only for the chaos it caused. A servant walks by, carrying a stack of shallow ceramic bowls filled with pomegranate seeds and something that looks suspiciously like edible gold. He pauses, sighs, and says, "For the economists." You do not ask, you find yourself near a reflecting pool shaped like a quill. Its surface is undisturbed, a perfect mirror of the cloudless sky. Someone has placed a single jasmine flower in the center. It floats aimlessly, like it has nowhere urgent to be, and really, neither do you. The Sultan, somewhere behind the palace walls, is said to be working on a new decree involving perfume taxes, poetry, wages, and revised measurements for happiness. His scribes have learned not to ask follow-up questions. You stretch out on a bench, hands behind your head. A breeze rustles the neem leaves. A faint smell of sandalwood lingers on your tunic, either from the poets or the official who mistook you for a scribe earlier. You didn't correct him. Remember that mosaic wall, the one with the unmatched tiles? There's a tiny doorway nearby. People say it leads to a room where the Sultan stores failed ideas, not documents actual objects. A gold-plated spoon, too wide to use. A chair shaped like a question mark. A feather pen dipped in honey. Why honey? To sweeten the words. He reportedly said, "You begin to think that being ruled by a philosopher is both a blessing and a logistical nightmare." Historians still debate how such a man ruled a kingdom of millions. Some say his intellect was too advanced. Others say he just didn't care for consequences. But you know better now. You've walked his streets, breathed his perfume, heard the scratch of ink on silk and the rustle of jasmine by moonlight. You've lived for a moment, in a world where poets are paid in scent and logic is slightly optional. And as the sun rolls westward, spilling honey-colored light across the domes and courtyards, you think to yourself, More kingdoms should smell this good. You wake not with a start, but with that gentle kind of rising that comes from sleeping near gardens, where even time seems to bloom more slowly. A bird chirps overhead, or possibly laughs. It's hard to tell. You stretch, blink, and remember. You're in Delhi, in the time of Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq, where ideas walk the streets in silk slippers and get paid in perfume. A palace bell rings somewhere distant. Not an alarm, more of a musical shrug to suggest that the hour has changed. And no one should feel too strongly about it today. You've decided to visit the mint, not because you care deeply about coins, but because this is where history's strangest financial experiment took root. You cross a wide courtyard where scribes are sunning themselves like cats. Scrolls open beside them, ink pots carefully shaded by parasols. One calls out, "Have you heard? They're minting coins from kitchen brass now. It's a new era of economic flexibility." You nod. Flexibility is one word for it. The mint itself is less a building and more a very confused series of connected rooms, each devoted to some part of coin production. You watch as brass is heated, stamped, cooled, and then rather shockingly thrown into sacks labeled royal currency. Handle with philosophy. You pick one up. The coin is warm, light, slightly crooked. On one side, a stylized lion. On the other, a line of poetry. Yes, really, because Muhammad bin Tughlaq had the brilliant or utterly baffling idea of minting poetic verses onto his experimental brass coins. Not every batch, but enough that merchants were soon arguing over the exchange rate between metaphor and meter. A scholarly uncertainty lingers here. Some argue that these poetic coins were propaganda, an attempt to elevate national morale through beauty. Others believe it was just the Sultan's way of reminding people that money, like verse, only has value because we agree it does. You glance. Around, one worker is polishing coins with a bit of saffron water. Another is sniffing a finished batch to ensure the aromatic consistency of currency. You don't ask questions. No one does anymore. Outside the mint, the marketplace bustles. A perfume dealer has set up a stall selling Sultan's mint sent in tiny glass bottles. The label reads, "Essence of brass, sweat, poetry, and 3 drops of sandalwood. Limited edition." You take a seat near a weaver who's embroidering silver thread into a scarf. She doesn't speak, just hums. The thread catches the light like moonlight spilled into cloth. An obscure tidbit reaches your ears. In his youth, Muhammad bin Tughlaq was said to have trained as a calligrapher and once wrote out the entire Quran by hand twice, just to perfect his penmanship. One version was reportedly done with rose ink, the other on black silk with gold ink, visible only by candlelight. No one can verify this. Historians nod politely and change the subject. You sip a cup of something warm and mildly herbal. A nearby merchant is shouting about pre-inflation prices, even though inflation won't be invented for another few centuries. He's ahead of his time, in a panicked sort of way. A child walks past, juggling 3 forged coins and a mango. You applaud. The mango is clearly the most valuable asset. You think, not for the first time, that logic in this city is like a peacock. Beautiful, but rarely straight in its path. And the air still smells faintly of roses and molten brass. You lean back, let it fill your lungs. You are now officially a financial expert in poetic currency. Congratulations, this evening. You find yourself at the edge of the royal gardens, where the air smells more like earth and growing things than incense. It's quiet here. too quiet, in fact, which usually means something slightly absurd, is about to happen. You follow a gravel path lined with flickering lamps in colored glass jars. It's almost theatrical, and sure enough, ahead is a stage. A real one, low wooden planks surrounded by cushions. A banner above it reads, "The Annual Night of Scented Theatre and Irrational Monologues." You take a seat. The crowd is eclectic. Some wear turbans twisted like pastry, others in scholars' robes, and one man appears to be dressed as a metaphor. You don't question it. The performance begins with a slow procession of actors, wearing masks shaped like fruit each, reciting a line of epic poetry about irrigation. Then a flute solo. Then silence. Then a woman with bells on her ankles enters, holding a single marigold and singing about bureaucracy. You think you understand. You probably don't. Muhammad bin Tughlaq loved the arts, not just high poetry, but the strange, the metaphorical, the performances that made no sense unless you were dreaming, or delirious, or both. He once declared that every citizen had the right to express themselves in verse, scent, or slow interpretive gesture. Naturally, the local theatre scene exploded. Historians still debate whether the Sultan genuinely enjoyed these performances or merely found them useful distractions. What's clear is that he sponsored dozens of troupes, many of which specialized in historical reenactments of events that hadn't happened yet, an obscure detail you overhear. One troupe once performed a play titled The Fall of the Future Dynasty, in which a goat played the role of fiscal policy. It was ... controversial ... back on stage. An actor collapses dramatically while another sprinkles rose petals over him and recites, "And thus fell the empire of silence beneath the weight of too many coins." A subtle jab at the Sultan's monetary experiments, or just artsy nonsense. Hard to say. You glance around. The audience is misty-eyed. A man 2 cushions over offers you a candied fig. You accept. It tastes like nostalgia and cloves. From behind the stage, a soft breeze carries the unmistakable smell of oud wood and something citrusy. You suspect the royal perfumer had a hand in this production. In fact, you're pretty sure the fog used for the dramatic entrance was scented. Theatrics, after all, are just politics with better costumes. Remember the scribe from earlier, the one who muttered about job security through confusion? He's here too, scribbling furiously, possibly writing a review, or maybe a eulogy. For what? Unknown. As the play ends, the actors bow not to applause, but to silence. It's considered polite. One by one, the audience stands, places a single flower on the edge of the stage, and leaves without speaking. You follow suit. On your walk back, the city is dim and hushed. Only the flickers of lamplight, the brush of silk robes, and a soft chorus of crickets accompany your thoughts. You remember a line from the play. What is madness but meaning scented too strongly? You think about that for a while, and then not at all. You pass by the garden gate, where a sleeping guard snores gently beneath a vine of sweet-smelling blossoms, and as you step onto the road home, a passing breeze carries the scent of rose, sandalwood, and something faintly ridiculous. Theatrical nonsense, or royal vision. You can no longer tell the difference. You're okay with that. The morning arrives like a half-forgotten stanza, quiet, a little foggy, and strangely poetic if you squint. You wake to the sound of bees. Not many, just a gentle trio, humming around a pomegranate tree that leans lazily over a palace wall. One bee bumps into your forehead. An intimate start to the day. You follow the smell of simmering lentils, and toasting flatbread through narrow corridors. Somewhere nearby, someone's singing. A cook, maybe. The lyrics involve onions, lost love, and something about bureaucracy, very on brand for this city. Today, you're headed to the Royal Hall of Questions. Yes, that's a real place. Mohammed bin Tughlaq built it as part debate hall, part intellectual arena, part very fancy open mic night. A grand dome structure with endless archways and floor cushions, so plush they could probably qualify as furniture in their own right. As you enter, you immediately hear the hum of argument, polite, civil, and delivered in voices so calm it's vaguely unsettling. One scholar is passionately defending the idea that night is merely the absence of personal responsibility. Another counters with, no, it's clearly where truth hides from daylight taxes. You take a seat on a cushion embroidered with geometric designs. A scribe offers you tea. It's steaming and tastes of cardamom, mystery, and possibly time. You're not sure, you just nod appreciatively. The Sultan's presence here is whispered, not declared. He sometimes listens from behind a screen, sometimes participates under a fake name, sometimes sends riddles by courier mid-debate, written on dried mango peels. Nobody questions the method anymore. A major historical fact, Mohammed bin Tughlaq is remembered as one of the most educated monarchs in medieval Islamic history, fluent in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and Sanskrit. He devoured philosophy like it was sweetened rice and had deep respect for Greek logic, though he often twisted it into shapes Plato never imagined. An obscure tidbit. The Sultan once proposed that each royal province should be assigned a chief thinker whose sole job was to write one new question per week. These were collected and read aloud at court. 1 week's top entry. If justice had a scent, would it smell like ink or iron? No answer was ever declared. Historians still debate whether this was a sincere attempt at government through wisdom or just a long-winded distraction from actual policy. Today's debate focuses on mirrors. Yes, mirrors. A young philosopher in a crimson robe argues that mirrors reflect not truth, but desire, that they are tools of self-invention. An older man with eyebrows that could be registered as birds replies, and yet, I still look tired in every one. Someone nearby coughs politely, a sign that this round is over. The next question, should taxes be levied based on dreams? You lean back and sip more tea. This city is brilliant and exhausting. You watch as an artist begins sketching the room from memory while blindfolded. Someone else is composing a haiku about bureaucracy. A third person is trying to argue the legality of clouds. And it's not even noon. You feel a familiar floral scent drift past. Someone's wearing sandalwood again. It's probably a poet. You step outside for a breath of air and find the garden surprisingly busy. There's a small chalkboard posted near a fig tree that reads, "Today's thoughts are sponsored by the scent of orange blossom." You nod solemnly. It's going to be that kind of day you decide to wander be, 'cause in this city, wandering is almost a civic duty. The streets are alive with low chatter, tinkling bells, the occasional shout about stolen watermelons, and the distant sound of someone reciting a weather forecast in rhyming couplets. It's surprisingly accurate. You head toward the outer districts, past the scholars' alleys and into the zone known fondly as where practical things happen. It's where masons, cloth dyers, tanners, and letter carvers live. The kinds of people who roll their eyes when poets start talking about metaphors involving trees. And yet, even here, the Sultan's strange influence lingers. A dyer waves you over to show you his latest commission. royal tunics dyed in crushed marigold, petals stitched with poetry along the hems. You read one aloud. This cloth contains both thread and thought. You're not sure whether to be impressed or gently concerned. You help the dyer carry a bundle of cloths to a public washing trough. The water here is faintly tinted from all the dye. A duck swims by, now partially turquoise. It seems unbothered. A bit farther on, you pass a wall where someone has posted flyers, handwritten, wax-sealed, perfumed flyers. One reads, "Wanted, scribe with symmetrical handwriting and a tolerance for scented ink." Another, lost poem about mangoes. Last seen near the East Gate. You chuckle. Then you stop, because you recognize the poem's first line. You heard it 3 days ago, from the storyteller by the tea vendor's stall. The mango poem lives. You walk to the East Gate, curiosity stirred. There, painted neatly on the side of a pottery shop, is the poem's last stanza. Not graffiti artful, sanctioned, scented with what smells like basil and nostalgia. You've entered the district of wandering words. Here, poems are public property. They appear on walls, are whispered on street corners, painted on steps, stitched into children's clothes. A strange but endearing tradition, started of course by Muhammad bin Tughlaq himself, who once declared, "Let verse be as common as air, and twice as fragrant." Historians still debate whether this directive had any real purpose, or was simply an example of the Sultan's poetic impulses gone rogue. Either way, the city took him seriously. A young girl skips by singing a limerick about goats and irrigation. A baker has written haiku on every loaf. A cobbler hands you a sandal with "walk softly," carry poems etched into the sole. An obscure tidbit. Some homes in this district have smelled chimneys, tiny clay pots on the roof that release scented smoke at dawn. The idea is that one's morning thoughts should rise with a pleasant aroma. You inhale today's scent, cinnamon and lavender, emotionally balanced. You pause at a small tea house where the menus are written in sonnet form. The owner, a short woman with a nose like a hawk's beak, offers you spiced milk with fig syrup. On the house, she says, if you can recite something, you try. You mumble the mango stanza. She claps. Close enough. As you sip, a perfumed breeze carries familiar notes of jasmine and sandalwood once more. Someone near the gate is burning an oil meant to attract wisdom and discourage poorly formed metaphors. It smells like roasted lemons and regret. You laugh, quietly. You don't want to scare the duck. The sun hangs low, painting long shadows that look like verses spilled across the road. You don't walk back, you drift, because now, even your footsteps. Rhyme.evening descends like a velvet curtain, heavy and deliberate, drawn across the sky with slow confidence. The streets begin to exhale. Markets pack away their chatter. Scent stalls seal their perfumes into clay jars. And a few wandering goats return home, looking oddly philosophical. You find yourself on a rooftop, not because you climbed anything. Heroic, just a slow, spiraling staircase behind a tea vendor's cart that smelled too good to ignore. Now you're above it all, perched beside a line of drying laundry and a pigeon who is clearly contemplating the nature of rain. From here, Delhi is quieter. Lanterns flicker across the skyline like the city has begun whispering its secrets in. Light somewhere, a flute plays a tune that keeps almost forgetting itself. You sit cross-legged near a slouching chimney, watching the Sultan's palace glow dimly in the distance. A small group is gathering on a neighboring rooftop. They're lighting candles. You lean in. It's a meeting of the Midnight Verse Society, a group of insomniac poets who believe the best lines are only born after the third cup of spiced milk and the second denial of sleep. One of them begins, "O moon, you have no taxes, teach me your ways." Another replies with a sleepy haiku, "Bread is not enough, if my coins smell like garlic. Where is my poem?" You stifle a laugh. The pigeon nods solemnly. A major historical fact floats to mind. Muhammad bin Tughlaq famously moved his entire capital city from Delhi to Dolatabad, and then, a few years later, decided to move it all the way back. People, camels, archives, royal furniture, everyone and everything was uprooted twice. Why? Scholars still debate. Some say it was strategic. Others say he just liked the idea of new scenery. Some suspect it was a royal-scale impulse decision he later deeply regretted but couldn't admit to. The Midnight Verse Society is now debating whether the moon is emotionally honest. Someone proposes that stars are actually tired ideas, just floating in the sky. No one disagrees an obscure cultural detail during Tughlaq's rule. There was a brief but real attempt to classify scents according to their intellectual effect. Rose was said to encourage clarity, musk, ambition, cinnamon, productivity, clove, that was for preventing romantic misjudgments. There were actual scent scholars. Imagine failing your exams because you inhaled too much nutmeg. You lie back. The rooftop tiles are warm. The air smells like dust, jasmine, and burning sandalwood. You realize the city is quieter, not because it sleeps, but because it listens. You try to think of a poem. You get as far as history dreams in sandalwood. And then, forget the rest. That's fine, so does everyone else. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it sneaks in like it forgot it had an appointment. The sun stretches a lazy arm across the rooftops, and someone 2 streets over begins banging pots in what might be breakfast preparation or a percussion rehearsal. Either way, your awake today feels heavier. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way that Tuesdays sometimes do. You wander toward the Bureau of Unfinished Decrees. Yes, it's real. Housed in a squat sandstone building with fading calligraphy on the doorframe. It's where all the Sultan's half-written laws, dream-ridden policy drafts, and unexecuted schemes go to nap indefinitely. You've never seen so much parchment in one place. Stacked to the ceilings. Rolled, folded, occasionally scented. You watch a clerk pull a scroll from a box, labeled to be considered, possibly by a future philosopher. It reads, "All officials shall be assigned a scent based on mood. Monday moods, citrus. Friday moods, vetiver." No one knows what vetiver smells like, but everyone agrees it sounds official. Another clerk is reading aloud from a decree that proposes a new measurement system based entirely on the time it takes to smell a flower. Length, he explains, is now the distance between 2 sandalwood whiffs. Wait, that's still being debated. Possibly rose petals per square breath. A major historical fact is casually dropped by one of the clerks during Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign. He created one of the earliest experiments in centralized bureaucracy, complete with departments for poetry, scent, trade, theology, and the other department, as far as anyone can tell, mostly deals with dream interpretation and public, duck-related complaints. Historians still debate whether this administrative expansion was a sign of genius, overreach, or deep personal boredom. A junior scribe offers you a tour. You walk past piles of rejected laws, one about scented street taxes, another requiring every home to have at least one philosophical inscription near the kitchen. One scroll simply reads, "All pillows must be embroidered with hope. A dog sleeps atop that one." You reach a hallway lined with incense braziers, not for ambience, but to prevent textual mildew. One smells distinctly of roasted cardamom and political uncertainty. An obscure detail: the Sultan once issued a nighttime law requiring all public fountains to be turned off by moonrise unless they produced a sound judged emotionally resonant. No record survives of how this was enforced. You exit the building slightly dazed. The air feels thick with forgotten ideas and poetic dust. Nearby, a man with a mobile bookstall is arguing with a customer about the definition of functional literature. You pass them and smile. You take the long road back toward the gardens. It's lined with wind chimes made from old scroll tubes. Each step you take sets off a faint rattle. Sounds like history trying to finish its sentences. Asterisk, this afternoon. The city feels wrapped in silkcot, dense silk that breathes too slowly. You walk beneath a canopy of bougainvillea, petals the color of daydreams brushing your shoulders. Even the birds seem too contemplative to bother with flight. They just sit and blink, which is exactly how you feel. Your path takes you toward the southern quarter, where the perfume guilds are headquartered. Guilds, plural, because one scent society simply wasn't enough in Mohammed bin Tughlaq's Delhi. Oh no. Here, every scent has a committee, and every committee has a poet. You pass a fountain burbling sleepily in the shade, shaped like a lotus and faintly green from thyme and limescale. The breeze from the water carries hints of lemongrass, rose, and some smell you can only describe as quietly expensive. At the gate of the Guild of Heady and Ambiguous Aromas, a doorman greets you by waving a feather fan soaked in clove oil. "House scent," he says, as if that explains anything. Inside, things only get stranger. The floors are covered in rugs, too plush to walk on without apology. The walls drip with drying herbs, patchouli, basil, dried mandrake root, and a herb called thinking mint, which no one has dared question. Glass shelves hold thousands of vials, each labeled in longhand script, so elegant it practically hums. You're led to the hall of scent trials. A round room, a quiet room, a scented room. Here, guild members gather to judge the emotional accuracy of new perfumes. One woman dabs a sample on her wrist, closes her eyes, and murmurs, "This smells like longing after rain, but less decisive." Another nods gravely. A major historical fact floats into view. During his reign, Tughlaq funded Perfume, scholars, actual academics, whose job was to study the psychological effects of scent on governance. One treatise even suggested scent-based. Voting citizens would sniff a series of options and vote for the most harmonious bouquet. It was never implemented, but it was discussed. At length, historians still debate whether this was satire that got out of hand, or a sincere attempt at sensory democracy. You watch as a new scent is tested. A young apprentice presents a formula meant to evoke gentle regret and seasonal optimism. It smells like saffron, ink, and slightly burnt bread. Everyone applauds. One obscure tidbit you overhear. Some guild members believe that memories have a smell signature, like fingerprints. There's a locked cabinet of historical scents meant to trigger past lives. The oldest one is labeled simply, First Loss, circa 1283. You decide not to open it. Before you leave, you're gifted a vial of perfume named Dream Delay. It smells like lavender ink and a nap that just slipped away. Back outside, the world feels less sharp. The sun, somewhere overhead, is half bored, half dazzled. You take the long road again. Passing a stone bench, you see the same dog from the Bureau of Unfinished Decrees. He's still sleeping, or thinking. Hard to tell. You lie down nearby. The perfume bottle warms in your pocket. You close your eyes. The city exhales. So do you. Evening has crept in again, a little more bashful this time. The sky is a faded watercolor pale orange, bleeding into soft violet. Street lamps blink awake with a reluctant flicker. You're in the central district now, near the old scriptorium, a place once meant for quiet study, but now something between a library, a museum, and a half-hearted community center. The walls here are tall and crumbly, made of stone that once tried to look imposing but gave up around the 14th century. Vines have taken over. Jasmine climbs through the cracks, as if to prove that even scholarship isn't immune to poetry. Inside, rows upon rows of wooden desks wait patiently beneath dangling oil lamps. The light is soft, golden, and flickers like it's remembering something. Dozens of manuscripts line the shelves. Most are unread, some are unreadable. All of them, according to a sign, are emotionally available. You run your finger along a dusty scroll. It smells faintly of almond oil and candle smoke. You sit, a sleepy archivist, barely taller than his own pile of books, brings you a cup of something warm and beige. Thinking tea, he explains. Less for ideas, more for forgiving the ones you've already had. You sip. It tastes like compromise. A scholar across from you is reviewing a document with his nose practically pressed to the page. He sighs deeply and mutters, "The ink is too honest." You pretend to understand. A major historical fact. Under Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the royal archives grew so large that entire buildings were repurposed to store royal correspondence, philosophical essays, and rejected dream interpretations. He believed that all thoughts deserved documentation. One memo simply read, "What if rivers could vote?" followed by 6 pages of speculative tax charts. Historians still debate whether this record-keeping was visionary or just obsessive hoarding with a literary flair. You wander past a table where rejected titles are being sorted for reuse. One is labeled "Letters to a Lost Spoon." Another, "The Philosophy of Empty Chairs." You pocket that one. Feels useful. An obscure cultural tidbit scribes in this period often scented their ink with diluted rosewater to make their writing feel less argumentative. One scholar claimed it helped reduce margin scribbles born out of rage. Some still preferred mint, arguing that rose encourages emotional vulnerability in footnotes. You climb a creaky spiral staircase to the mezzanine dot. From here, you see it all: the rows of patient books, the swirl of scent and thought, the scholars sleeping with scrolls as pillows, and beyond the window, the streets now calm, stitched together by the soft flicker of lanterns and the deeper hum of a city thinking itself to sleep. You find a niche between 2 dusty windows. Sit, listen, think not, hard, just softly, like a whisper tucked into a sentence that almost made sense. Today begins with the soft clang of a copper pan and the slightly suspicious smell of roasted cumin mixed with too much ambition. You're walking through the northern districts, now the part of Delhi where artisans live in organized chaos and paint their dreams directly onto walls, carts, fabrics, and, sometimes, their goats. You pause at a spice market. The colors are so intense they almost hum. Piles of turmeric, saffron, coriander, and dried rose petals swirl the air into a soup of scent that feels somehow philosophical. One merchant is hawking a blend he calls Emperor's Regret. You ask, what's in it? He smiles and says, mostly bay leaf and something unspeakable. You leave with a small pouch. Regret is surprisingly affordable. Today's path leads you to the royal kitchens, not a metaphorical phrase, but the actual kitchens of Mohammed bin Tughlaq's sprawling court, which feed hundreds daily and house an entire department devoted solely to edible art. The building itself is low, wide, and covered in vines that smell faintly of coriander and goat. Inside, it is somehow louder and calmer than expected. You pass dozens of cooks, each with their own corner of chaos, one rolling dough as if taming a beast, another stirring a pot of bubbling, something that hisses like an opinion. You pause near a counter labeled fragrant garnishes, Division B. Here, a cook is painstakingly shaving saffron threads over what appears to be a poetic rice pudding. It spells something in Persian, possibly joy, possibly mild confusion. Either way, it's edible. A major historical fact simmers to the surface. Tughlaq's court was among the first in the region to document royal recipes not only as instructions, but as philosophical expressions. Dishes had names like longing in lentils and the mild bitterness of wisdom. One stew was simply called yes. Historians still debate whether this culinary cataloguing was a form of early food therapy or just another way to avoid governing. An obscure tidbit. It was customary for the Sultan's food to be scented with rose or cardamom, but never both unless it was a national holiday or a personal crisis. A coded message, essentially hidden in the spoon. You sit on a wooden bench by the hearth, accepting a small bowl of almond soup offered by a passing cook with eyebrows shaped like question marks. It tastes warm and oddly reassuring, like a kind word from someone who barely knows you. Near the pantry, you overhear a kitchen poet reciting a couplet to a sack of lentils. O humble grain, you nourish and forgive. You ask no gold, just a quiet sieve. No one claps. But the lentils seem comforted. Outside again, the scent of roasted cumin clings to your sleeves. You pass the garden where herbs are grown by moon phase. A sign reads, "Do not water the mint after a quarrel." You obey, though you're not sure what happened between the mint and the marjoram. As the day cools, you walk slower. The scent of the kitchen lingers behind you. And ahead, always ahead, another question waits, steaming gently. You're in a courtyard now, one of the older ones, where the stone tiles have cracked like stretched laughter, and the fig trees lean in as though eavesdropping on the past. It's quiet here, except for the man talking to a camel. You approach cautiously. He's not mad, at least not unproductively so. He's a court philosopher, part of the Sultan's wandering wisdom cause. A group of semi-employed thinkers tasked with testing theories on willing ears. Camels count, apparently. Today's topic, emotional architecture, he explains. This building, use its arches, curve inward, a protective gesture. Its windows are small, humility. Its fountain babbles without ambition. The whole thing smells faintly of jasmine and disappointment. Therefore, a structure of mild regret. You nod, slowly. The camel chews something contemplatively, a major historical fact, one that still confuses and delights architectural scholars, that Mohammed bin Tughlaq once commissioned a palace wing based on musical notation. Each column was meant to represent a note. Walking through the hall was supposed to feel like moving through a melody. It collapsed after 6 weeks. No one was hurt. The echo was lovely. Historians still debate whether the collapse was symbolic or just bad engineering with a lyrical excuse. You leave the philosopher mid-theory and wander to the far side of the courtyard, where a series of low benches circle an open-air bath. Not for bathing, those happen elsewhere, but for conversation. The idea, you're told, was that warm air would encourage warm thoughts. So far, mostly tepid ones. Today's topic, at the bath, smells that lie. A perfume maker leans forward. Rose is a fraud, he says. It promises softness, but hides a thorn. Now, cinnamon tells you up front that it's aggressive. Someone counters with scent on the wood. A third declares, musk has emotional baggage. A fourth offers clove as the scent equivalent of a very firm hug. An obscure tidbit from one of the debaters. During the late years of Tughlaq's reign, incense recipes were occasionally submitted as philosophical arguments. One such scroll, titled On the Impermanence of Lemon Balm, is still preserved in a sandalwood box that smells stronger than its contents. You lean back against the courtyard wall, eyes half-lidded. Someone begins reading a story, aloud, not loudly, not theatrically. Just present. It's about a boy who tried to scent the wind. He failed, but the attempt made the air kinder for a week. You believe it. The sun shifts, tilts, rests. A musician nearby plays a reed pipe. 3 notes, then nothing. Then again, like a memory trying to remember itself. A cat stretches near your feet and yawns like a sentence ending without punctuation. The philosopher returns, still mid-thought. He stops beside you and says, "This wall feels like remorse." You touch it. He's not wrong, and just like that, you realize you've been breathing in a place where scent is architecture. Emotion is flavor, and philosophy rides camels. You smile. It makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. Asterisk, you find yourself meandering through a covered walkway now, its ceiling low and carved with quiet patience. The sandstone under your feet feels warm, like it remembers every step taken upon it. Somewhere above, a bird rustles in the rafters, then decides against flight. Wise bird, the corridor spills into a small circular plaza. At the center, a lone tree leans like it's eavesdropping on time. It's an almond tree, older than the plaza itself. And according to local legend, it's never once lost all its leaves, not even in protest. You're here for the symposium of forgotten ideas. It happens once every week, or whenever enough people remember to gather. Chairs have been arranged in a vague circle, clearly moved by individuals who disagreed on what circular means. Scholars, poets, shopkeepers, and one goat have shown up. The goat is wearing bells. No one comments on it. A soft gong sounds. Not a ceremonial one. Just an old pot someone tapped absent-mindedly. A woman with streaks of saffron in her braid clears her throat and begins. I propose the reinstatement of nap-based governance, murmurs of agreement, or contented sighs. Hard to tell. Another participant raises a hand, unnecessarily. And I suggest that street names be changed monthly to reflect emotional weather. Someone else. We must debate the ethics of scented punctuation. You sit very still, breathing. In the combined aroma of ink, warm almonds, sun-drenched fabric, and a hint of roasted fennel from a nearby food stall that refuses to close. A major historical fact surfaces lazily. Tughlaq was known for sending out imperial, farman royal orders that were so speculative or philosophical that some administrators simply read them aloud and waited for them to make sense by the third hearing. One infamous example began with, "Let us imagine time as a garden," and ended with a tax increase. Historians still debate whether this was a literary device or just royal misdirection at its most perfumed. As the sun begins its late descent, a soft reading begins, a scroll titled 11 Uses for an Unsent Letter. The final use is to scent your pillow with possibilities. Everyone claps, in the quiet way people do when they don't want to scare the moment. An obscure detail comes from a grey-bearded man who claims, quite seriously, that the Sultan once proposed a network of emotionally calibrated hourglasses for public plazas. Each would release a scent instead of sand, changing every quarter hour to indicate the societal mood. Prototype 1 smelled like time and productive melancholy. You rise as the gathering dissolves. The goat jingles away down an alley. The city glows gently now. Lamps are lit by hand, one by one, not hurried, as if the fire itself needed convincing. You find a spot by the edge of the plaza, on a stone ledge carved with faded poetry. The words are barely legible, but the rhythm is still there, like a drumbeat that forgot its purpose, but not its pace. You sit, close your eyes, let everything soften. The air is thick with almond blossom and the distant echo of voices gently remembering things they never said aloud. And now, let your eyes go soft, like mist settling across a quiet garden. Let your breath find the slow rhythm of a lazy reed swaying in warm, scented air. You are no longer walking. You are being carried gently by old stories, by streets that know your steps, by candlelight flickering in windows you never needed to open. The city is quiet now, but it's not asleep. It's watching over you, soft shoes on soft earth, silk curtains sighing in the breeze. A faint memory of rose and ink lingers in the air. Even the palace is whispering less. Somewhere, far away but not really far at all, someone is composing a poem about nothing. It's beautiful, it rhymes in silence. And you are still. Time slows to a syrupy trickle. Thoughts dissolve like sugar in warm milk. The almond tree still stands. The morning unfurls like a page written in soft gold, with ink so light it barely insists on being read. You wake to the gentle rustle of linen curtains and the distant clink of ceramic cups being set down too politely for urgency. Outside your window, a dove coos, a song that starts strong but loses motivation halfway through. You stretch, slowly, somewhere nearby. Someone is sweeping a courtyard with the determination of a monk and the rhythm of a poet who's had just enough sleep to think about metaphors but not enough to use them responsibly. Today, you've chosen to visit the office of scented correspondence. Yes, it exists. Down an alley painted with faded flowers and surprisingly vivid political cartoons. The office resides behind a pair of olive wood doors etched with letters in 5 scripts and no consistency. Above the door is a plaque that reads, "Words, when worn with fragrance, become invitations instead of instructions." Inside, everything smells faintly of parchment and warm nutmeg. Desks stretch across the room, like islands of rumpled paper. Attendants in inky robes move about carrying trays of wax seals, ribbon spools, and tiny glass vials containing mood-specific perfumes. The labels read things like earnest request, cautious admiration, and polite but unreasonable. You approach a desk where a man with gold-rimmed spectacles is reading a letter while gently fanning it with a scented feather. He looks up. Diplomatic tone or nostalgic regret? He asks. You blink. He nods and answers for you. Nostalgic regret. A popular choice this season. A major historical fact begins to unfurl. Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Escort was one of the first in the region to regulate the official language of imperial correspondence, not just by content, but by tone. Royal scribes were trained not only in calligraphy and grammar, but in the proper scent to accompany each style of message. A letter denying a tax appeal, lavender and clove. A letter of royal favor, ambergris and sweet lime. Historians still debate whether this innovation was bureaucratic brilliance or a very fragrant form of passive aggression. An obscure tidbit: at one point, scribes competed in annual tournaments where they composed entire conversations on palm leaves using scented ink. The winner received a perfumed turban and immunity from copywriting for a full year. You're offered the chance to try. You're given a small sheet of cotton paper, a quill, and a tiny pot of ink infused with something that smells like antique. Lemons, you write. I meant to say thank you. I just forgot where I put the words. The scribe reads it and nods. Clove and fig, possibly with a hint of rosemary. You feel oddly seen later as you wander back through the streets. You pass a boy selling packets of pressed flour, letters blank, but slightly scented with sandalwood and hope. You buy too. You don't know who you'll write to, but the scent lingers on your fingertips. And for now, that's enough. Asterisk. The afternoon drifts in like a thought you forgot to finish. Warm, a little hazy, and only slightly structured. You follow. A narrow cobblestone path where shadows cling lazily to shutters, and the street cats have entered their hour of judgmental napping. You are heading toward the Academy of Useful Confusion. Technically, it's a debating school, but nobody who attends seems entirely sure what it's debating. The building itself is quietly chaotic. A small marble dome with walls built at deliberate, disorienting angles, just to keep your expectations flexible. The courtyard is hexagonal, or perhaps octagonal. Scholars here don't like commitment. You're greeted by a man holding a scroll and a mango. He looks at you, then at the mango, then back at you. This, he says, pointing to the fruit, is a metaphor. He walks away. You do not follow. Inside, students sit in circles or shapes, approximating circles, engaged in passionate discussions about ambiguous topics, like how much silence is too much, and if a scent travels without permission, is it trespassing? A lecturer in a robe the color of mild disagreement taps a stick on a low platform and announces, "Today's topic, can truth wear perfume?" A major historical fact. Muhammad bin Tughlaq established more than a dozen informal schools like this one across his empire spaces, not for practical education, but for what he called mental flexibility. Students were encouraged to question, doubt, invent, contradict, and sent their arguments with logic and rosewater in equal measure. Historians still debate whether this intellectual freedom was progressive statecraft or a prolonged, poetic method of distraction. You sit beside a group debating the ethics of scented letters sent anonymously. One student declares, "If the scent is cinnamon, it's clearly a warning." Another argues, "No, cinnamon is an invitation wrapped in ambiguity." A third simply says, "My aunt smells like cinnamon," and everyone nods solemnly. An obscure tidbit emerges. Some debate tournaments ended not in victory or defeat, but in mutual aromatic consensus. If both sides could agree on a scent that described their shared uncertainty, The match was declared a tie and celebrated with sweetened yogurt and a nap. A bell chimes, softly announcing the hour of gentle contradictions. Everyone is invited to walk in circles and think of one thing they've never questioned, then question it. While holding a flower, you participate, mostly out of curiosity. You think about the moon. You think about your name. You think about whether the word history has a scent. You walk slowly. The flower in your hand smells like forgetting. Or basil, it's hard to be sure. When the hour ends, no one claps. That would imply resolution instead. They sigh, softly, thoughtfully, like they've just remembered something they never quite knew. You leave the academy quietly, carrying a petal. Someone handed you without explanation. It smells like honesty, or maybe that's just the street air. Again, asterisk, evening curls around the rooftops like a lazy question mark. The sky is the color of steeped tea dark with hints of clove and thoughts. You walk slowly, wrapped in a scarf that smells faintly of the scrolls you were near earlier. Ink and lint. It's a look. Tonight, you're attending a gathering in the Garden of Partial Truths. It's not a metaphor. It's a real place. Tucked behind the palace's oldest wall, guarded by a door that creaks in philosophical protest. You enter. The garden is long and narrow, lined with low shrubs that bloom only when someone speaks kindly, or so the sign claims. Benches are spaced deliberately too far apart for convenient gossip, but just close enough for shared silence. There are lanterns hanging from trees, each emitting a slow pulse of scented smoke, musk, fig, and something you can only describe as last-minute doubt. The event is an open-air storytelling night, but there's a twist. All stories told here must be partially true and partially invented, and no one is allowed to say which parts are which. The audience is encouraged to believe generously. The first storyteller steps forward, a man with a voice like cracked velvet. He begins. In the 21st year of his reign, Sultan Tughlaq invited a cloud to court. A soft chuckle ripples through the benches. He asked the cloud for news of distant lands. The cloud replied only with rain. It soaked the philosophers, and the poets rejoiced. From then on, weather was given diplomatic immunity. You hear someone near you whisper, "That sounds plausible." A major historical fact: Muhammad bin Tughlaq was indeed fascinated with the natural world and issued several decrees involving rainfall documentation, cloud pattern prediction, and something called the mood of monsoon, which was apparently logged weekly by a small team of bored scholars. Historians still debate whether these environmental obsessions were rooted in spiritual belief or a particularly elaborate form of data hoarding. A woman stands next. She tells the story of a perfumer who created a fragrance so emotionally accurate that everyone who smelled it wept for the same memory, despite never having lived it. The scent was banned, the recipe destroyed, except it WASN single quotes. Half the garden looks around nervously. The third storyteller begins with a declaration. This story is a lie about a truth, or a truth about a lie. I forget. Then she tells a tale about a boy who tried to record silence, discovered it had a scent, and sold the bottle for a goat and 2 scrolls titled When No One Asked and the Pause Between Words. An obscure tidbit floats by during Tughlaq's rule. A tax exemption was once granted to professional listeners employed to do nothing but listen at court, so that those who spoke could feel truly heard. Their job was to nod meaningfully and occasionally sigh. You wish they still existed. As the night deepens, the stories grow slower, sleepier. Someone tells a story entirely in questions. Someone else recites a lullaby for an emotion that never arrived. Lanterns flicker. The scented smoke rises in spirals. Cat jumps onto a bench and falls asleep. Mid-sentence. You close your eyes for a moment. The earth smells of rose roots and unfinished stories. And you're somewhere between memory and possibility. Exactly where the garden wants you. Morning shows up, out of order. The light is bright, then soft, then indecisive. You roll your eyes at the sun, which seems unsure of itself. Fair enough. You're not entirely sure what day it is either. Today's destination is the archive of dreams that never happened. You heard about it at the garden last night. Someone mentioned it in passing, with a tone usually reserved for half-remembered songs or a favorite cup that broke 5 years ago. It's housed in a former bathhouse on the edge of the city. You find it by following a trail of crushed marigold petals and quiet. The building smells of lavender, warm stone, and something like memory if it had texture. Inside, the space is cool and dim. Narrow windows cast slow-moving stripes of light across mosaic floors. A single bell rings somewhere deep in the building every 27 minutes. No one knows why. You approach the central chamber, where the dreams are kept. Each one is stored as a parchment scroll, but not written in words. They're marked with symbols, small sketches, fragments of scent, and occasionally handwritten emotions. A clerk greets you. He wears gloves, not out of cleanliness, but to keep reality from smudging. You ask how the dreams were collected. He smiles. Visitors donate them. Lost ones, mostly, or ones they were too afraid to want. He hands you a scroll. You unroll it. Inside, the drawing of a boat made from paper lanterns, drifting through stars shaped like teardrops. Below it, someone has written, "Once, I nearly believed I was allowed joy." You don't ask who wrote it. A major historical fact, Tughlaq's court encouraged dream documentation, not only from scholars and nobles, but from soldiers, cooks, even traveling musicians. Dreams were considered reflections of divine whim or personal unrest, and some decisions were made after consulting the patterns within them. A road was once rerouted because a mason dreamt of a goat crying on the original path. Historians still debate whether this method of governance was spiritual openness or a strategy for dodging accountability. You walk among the shelves. One scroll smells like burnt honey and dried rose. Another, cedar and hesitation. You pause by a display labeled Collected Dreams. Anonymous, scented series, year 724. One reads, "I held a conversation with a bell. It forgave me," an obscure detail. The archive once held a section of shared dreams, where multiple citizens claimed to dream the same thing on the same night. One record involves a floating staircase and a child made of cinnamon sticks. The phenomenon was never explained, and the section is now roped off with silk ribbon and polite fear. You're offered the opportunity to leave a dream behind. You think for a long moment. Then you write, "There was a door. It opened. I stayed." The clerk accepts it with a bow. He sprinkles a bit of cardamom on the scroll before tucking it into a woven box marked Gentle Uncertainties. You leave through a quiet hallway, outside. The sky is trying on shapes again, and you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming now. But maybe that's the point. The afternoon hums like a bee that's slightly late to everything. You wander through a quieter district, now less about scholars and spices, more about stitching and silence. Laundry flaps from windows like flags from miniature nations of routine. You're headed to the Department of Lost Time. It's neither ominous nor tragic, just bureaucratic. The building is small, slouching slightly under the weight of its own confusion. Ivy climbs one wall, then gives up halfway. The front door has a bell that rings a full second after you've already opened it. Inside, it smells like old paper, boiled lentils, and mild regret, essentially the scent of postponement. A woman at the front desk greets you with a nod that suggests she once understood punctuality but doesn't talk about it anymore. She hands you a form. "You can't fill it out," she says, helpfully. "That's part of the process." Around you, shelves groan under the weight of files labeled things like time misplaced during conversations, unfinished thoughts, and the hour you spent looking for your shoes in 1326. You sit in a waiting chair that reclines slightly too far. A clerk nearby reads a scroll titled 11 Days that disappeared after lunch. A major historical fact. During the later years of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's rule, he introduced a calendar revision so complex that entire festivals were observed on the wrong dates. For months, 1 year, spring arrived twice, or never. Scholars tried to correct it. Eventually, they just stopped acknowledging Tuesdays. Historians still debate whether the Sultan's temporal experiments were inspired by philosophy or a deep distrust of Mondays. A soft bell rings maybe for you, maybe not. You're led into a room where people sit with sand timers and just watch, not for function, for reconciliation. A man turns his over and says, "This was the moment I didn't say anything." A woman next to him turns hers. "The joke I forgot halfway through." Everyone nods, an obscure tidbit. It was once customary in this city to host time reconciliation teas, where neighbors gathered to apologize for borrowed minutes. The menu included idle conversation, blank paper, and something called crumb cake of consequence. No one remembers the ingredients. You sit with your own timer. You flip it. It pours slowly. Your mind does not race. You think of a sentence you nearly said 3 years ago. It waves politely from the hourglass. Someone coughs. The clerk returns. "Thank you," she says. "Your delay has been recorded." You leave the building. Outside. The breeze smells like time and a missed appointment you no longer mind. You're not late, you're just here. Evening shuffles in on slippered feet. The lamps are lit lower tonight, not because of energy savings, but because the city is in a whispering mood. The sky has folded itself into a soft grey-blue blanket, and somewhere, far off, a flute is playing a scale it may never finish. You're following a narrow alley now. The walls lean in close, like they're telling secrets to each other and letting you pass only if you agree not to repeat anything. The alley ends at a door with no name. Only a small stone relief of a nose and the inscription, "Smell and be changed." You've arrived at the Museum of Forgotten Scents. Inside, the light is dim but intentional. The air feels heavy with memory. Not sadness, more like the weight of something that once mattered deeply, but quietly. Glass domes cover small bowls arranged on silk cushions. Each bowl contains a scent once known to the city, now vanished from daily life. There's a guide to help you navigate. An old man with a voice like worn velvet and a slow blink. "We don't call them perfumes," he says, "just echoes." You lean in to the first display. The label reads, "Ink heated on a winter morning before writing an overdue letter." The smell is smoky, warm, slightly anxious. You're transported instantly to a desk you've never sat at, writing words you never sent. Another dome, the hem of a grandmother's sleeve, a soft blend of turmeric, soap, and wool. You almost cry, but don't. A major historical fact surfaces slowly in the mid-years of Tughlaq's reign. Certain perfumers were tasked with recreating event-based fragrances. These were used to trigger memory among courtiers, especially when trying to recall details of important meetings, oaths, or poetic duels. Some believed memory itself was stored in the air, not the mind. Historians still debate whether this was sensory science or a particularly sentimental excuse for daydreaming during meetings. You move from scent to scent. One smells like the back room of a fabric shop at dusk. Another, the top of a child's head during festival season. A third is labeled, waiting for news, with hope and disappointment in equal measure. You ask how the scents are preserved. Carefully, says the guide. We wrap them in stillness. An obscure tidbit. Legend says the Sultan once had a vault filled with sealed boxes labeled only with dates and moods. The key to the vault. A scented ribbon that changed smell depending on the truthfulness of the person holding it. Naturally, it went missing. Naturally, no one took the blame. Your final stop is a room with no light at all. Complete darkness. Here scents are released in intervals. You sit, wait. A breeze passes. It smells like books never written. Then, saffron and storm, ere someone once loved you, it says. Finally, mint and ash, something ended, gently. You leave in silence. The guide nods once, then returns to a chair and opens a book with no title. Outside, the world is scentless for a moment. Then jasmine, then dust, and then the thought. You're not just walking through history. You're breathing it in. The night drapes itself over Delhi, like a well-worn shawl, comfortable, familiar, maybe a little frayed at the edges. You walk slower now, not out of fatigue, but because the streets seem to ask for it. The moon overhead is only half committed, a crescent of silver observing everything without offering commentary. You've decided to follow an old path, one not marked on maps, but murmured in courtyards. A route once taken by the Sultan's nighttime entourage, poets, astronomers, scholars, and a man whose only recorded title was he who listens to clouds. You think he was probably underpaid. Your steps lead you to a hill at the edge of the city. Sparse trees line the slope, shaped by wind and neglect. At the top sits a pavilion, small, octagonal, and open on all sides. It hums with the kind of silence only ancient stone can produce. You sit. The wind carries hints of cardamom and distant flutes. Not music, exactly, more like a memory of someone trying to play music, badly, but with conviction. Tonight's gathering is informal. A group of thinkers, wanderers, and those afflicted with occasional brilliance have come together to share unsolvable questions. They're encouraged. Applause is discouraged. Silence is respected. The first speaker clears his throat and offers, if a scent reminds you of something that never happened, is it a lie or a prophecy? Someone nods. Another person hums. No one answers. A major historical fact stirs beneath. The stars. Muhammad bin Tughlaq was fascinated with paradoxes. He once commissioned a philosophical court document titled On the Importance of Uncertainty in Royal Decrees. It included instructions that contradicted themselves every other sentence. The closing line simply read, "The rest is for you to feel." Historians still debate whether this document was an exercise in metaphysics or a subtle declaration of imperial burnout. The second speaker, younger, shyer, asks, can two people remember the same scent differently and still call it love? The silence that follows is nearly audible. An obscure tidbit surfaces in your memory. It was once customary in certain Delhi households to pass around a small vial of perfume before bedtime. Each family member would take a whiff and say what it reminded them of. If 3 or more people said the same thing, dessert was granted. The third speaker doesn't speak at all. She opens a cloth pouch and tosses its contents, dried orange peel and cinnamon bark, into the wind. The scent rises, settles, stirs something unnameable. No one dares interrupt. You close your eyes. The city below flickers with soft lights. You think about a scent from years ago, a room, a person, a moment you forgot you missed it. Returns, not exactly, but faithfully. You smile. The stars don't twinkle, they just wait. The next morning arrives with all the subtlety of a yawn halfway through a conversation. The sky is blue, but not ambitious about it. You step into your slippers like they're old friends, and set out again, this time toward the hall of misnamed things. It's more cheerful than it sounds. The hall was established by scholars tired of correcting people. They simply gathered every object, idea, and memory that had been misnamed throughout the Sultanate and gave them a new home, a place where confusion wasn't punished, just alphabetized. The building itself is shaped like an unfinished question mark. You push open the door, which creaks melodically, and are greeted by a plaque. Names are suggestions. Interpret accordingly. Inside, shelves upon shelves are filled with mislabeled items. A teapot labeled emotional map. A scroll tagged instructions for a dance no one knows. A sealed jar titled Rain, misunderstood. You feel oddly comforted. A docent with a calm voice and cinnamon breath offers to guide you. This way to the gallery of incorrectly remembered smells, they say. It's where nostalgia goes to stretch. You walk together past an exhibit called Things We Called Love that were probably lunch. Another titled Spices Used in Anger. A major historical fact drifts through the air like sandalwood smoke during his reign. Muhammad bin Tughlaq frequently renamed entire cities based on their emotional atmosphere rather than their geography. One city was briefly called Mild. Disappointment followed by tea. Another, the place where we forgot why we came. Historians still debate whether these renamings were philosophical experiments or the result of administrative sleep deprivation. You stop at a scent station, where visitors are encouraged to take a whiff and write down the first thing they accidentally remember. You sniff a vial labeled yesterday, but sideways. Your mind flashes to a staircase you once tripped on, and the sound of someone laughing kindly. You write, falling with grace. The docent nods approvingly. You'll do well in the next room. They lead you to a small chamber filled with soft cushions and jars labeled only with attempts. One scent smells like hope wrapped in toast. Another smells like a letter that arrived a week too late, but was still welcome, an obscure tidbit from the docent. There was once a short-lived perfume fad in Delhi called Unnamed. It was made using only ingredients the creators refused to identify. People wore it proudly, then panicked when no one recognized them. Sales plummeted. Mystery, it turns out, is best worn sparingly. You sit for a while in the misnamed garden lavender, labeled jealousy. Rosemary called persistence. Marigolds known simply as maybe. You lie down in the grass, not for a purpose, just because the sky has started humming again. A tune it refuses to title. Asterisk, late. Afternoon leans in with golden elbows on the windowsills, too content to rush. You've wandered past familiar alleys, past the tea house with the philosophical sugar bowls, past the fig tree that always looks like it's about to say something. You're heading somewhere quiet because today's destination doesn't tolerate loud thinking. You arrive at the Hall of Apologies and Scented Regrets. It's not a confession booth or a tribunal, more like a poetic archive, a place where people came to write, bottle, and sometimes release their apologies. The building is round, with no sharp corners, so guilt has nowhere to hide, says the inscription carved into the doorframe. The air smells like damp paper, dried citrus peel, and the faint metallic whisper of ink left too long in the sun. Inside, shelves hold thousands of small glass vials. Some are sealed with wax, others stoppered with silk. Labels are simple: for not listening, for loving poorly, for too much silence, for that one festival. Each contains a handwritten apologies, sometimes a single word, sometimes several pages, always scented. Not for perfume, for memory. You're offered one to open. You choose a tiny blue bottle labeled for rushing past you. The scroll inside reads, "You smiled and I did not stop. The street was short, my guilt longer. The scent of rose lingered on your shawl. I remember it now. That will have to do." The scent inside is rose water with a trace of sandalwood and something slightly sharp, perhaps, regret distilled with honesty. A major historical fact unfolds slowly. Mohammed bin Tughlaq once instituted an official department for correspondence of personal redress. Nobles and citizens alike were encouraged to pen written apologies, to be archived with associated sense. It was believed apologies should engage all the senses, so that even the soul could nod in recognition. Historians still debate whether this policy was emotionally forward-thinking or an elaborate public relations experiment to soften the Sultan's more questionable decisions. In one corner, a scribe is transcribing a particularly long apology titled "For the Incident with the Goat and the Spice Cart." You don't ask. You suspect it's better that way. An obscure tidbit: in the final decade of Tughlaq's reign, there was a yearly holiday known as the Evening of Gentle Wrongs, where people were encouraged to send anonymous apologies accompanied by tiny sachets of scented herbs. If the recipient burned the sachet, forgiveness was implied. If they planted it, reconciliation was attempted. If they returned it unopened, well, some apologies are just meant to be heard, not resolved. You sit at one of the writing desks. You stare at a blank scroll for a long time. Then, carefully, you write, "I was supposed to say more. I didn't." You smiled anyway. "I remember the cinnamon in the air." You place the scroll in a small copper vial. The clerk adds a pinch of saffron. You feel oddly lighter as you leave. The hallway smells like rosemary and quiet relief. Asterisk. The sun has dipped low, and the shadows stretch like they're trying to remember how to be tall. Your walk takes you along the western edge of the city, where fewer people linger and the air smells faintly of baked brick and distant fig smoke. You're headed to the atrium of almosts, a gentle place, unfinished, both by design and by fate. It was meant to be a great hall, a library, and a perfumery, all in one, but construction stopped halfway through when, according to rumor, the architect fell in love with uncertainty and never returned to the site. Instead of being completed, the building was gently adopted by the city, which now uses it for quiet thinking, occasional weeping, and storing projects that were lovingly started but never quite finished. The floors are uneven in the most poetic way. The walls end mid-thought. One ceiling is made of woven palm leaves that have been replaced, one at a time, by visitors who needed something to do with their hands. You find a place to sit beside a pile of scrolls, labeled maybe later. A young girl across the room is carefully drawing flowers on a page titled Recipe for Peace. Not quite ready. You nod at her. She doesn't look up. The atrium hosts a daily ritual at sunset. Visitors are invited to whisper one thing they almost did, then place it in a jar scented with something that feels ... unfinished. You're handed a slip of paper. You write, "I almost told him I forgave him." The scent jar tonight smells of lavender, ink, and damp ash, the scent of words that waited too long. A major historical fact unfolds in a hush. During the height of Tughlaq's reign, artisans were commissioned to construct buildings that reflected abstract human states. The atrium of almosts was originally meant to be the hall of uncertainty resolved, but the workers requested it be left incomplete, believing that perfect resolution was a kind of arrogance. The Sultan reportedly agreed, but then tried to rename it anyway. The name never stuck. Historians still debate whether the project's incompleteness was deliberate brilliance or simply the result of budget, exhaustion, and philosophical fatigue. An obscure tidbit. For a brief period, a local poet attempted to host open mic nights, here titled Probably. Each performer was required to end their poem with the word maybe. The tradition was short-lived, but one surviving line still echoes through the atrium's stone. "I thought I knew what love was. Maybe." You walk along the southern corridor, where scent tiles have been inlaid along the wall. Each one emits a faint aroma when touched. You pass your fingers over a few. A tile that smells like a letter written, but never sent. A tile that smells like cooking for someone who never arrived. A tile that smells like your voice. When you doubted it, you stop. You stay still for a while. Outside, the night exhales, and the stars begin their slow, silent guessing game. The stars are brighter tonight, or maybe just more opinionated. They blink overhead like they're gossiping with the moon, which is hanging low and full of knowing. You follow a road, paved not with stone, but with pressed petals, sealed into Razuna path that glows faintly underfoot, though no one's ever explained why. It leads you to one of the city's oldest structures. You arrive at the Chamber of Disguised Truths. It was once part of the royal archives, then a perfume vault, then briefly a storage room for musical instruments that couldn't be tuned. Now, it serves a different purpose entirely, a quiet haven for riddles, metaphors, and whispered facts wrapped in soft poetry. Nothing here is ever said plainly, and that's precisely the point. The door is small and round. You duck to enter. Inside, candlelight flickers from dozens of low sconces, casting long shadows that stretch like rumors. A woman sits cross-legged in the center of the room, surrounded by cushions and curious onlookers. She's wearing a robe stitched with tiny images of keys, some ornate, some childlike, some broken. She speaks slowly, as if her words are fragile. Once, she begins, there lived a man who bottled silence. Not quiet, not calm, silence. He sold it to those who had too much to say. Someone in the room nods, perhaps too knowingly. A major historical fact glimmers softly. Muhammad bin Tughlaq's court was infamous for embedding royal orders within poetry. Decrees were written as riddles, with lines like, "Where figs grow in frost, let the tax be forgiven." Entire villages spent days decoding whether they were being pardoned or punished. Historians still debate whether this literary strategy was a form of creative diplomacy or a calculated attempt to stay misunderstood. You walk through the chamber, gently touching scrolls displayed under glass. One is titled, "A Truth Worn as a Hat." Another reads the confession inside a compliment. A scent station offers hidden meanings in bottled form. You smell one labeled what she meant when she said nothing. It's sharp at first clove, maybe, and then softens into something warm and melancholy. An obscure tidbit rests in the form of a small mural on the back wall. It shows a young boy holding a bottle, whispering to it. According to local legend, some truth was once spoken so honestly that it had to be hidden in perfume to survive. The bottle was buried in the city, or lost, or maybe it never existed at all. As you prepare to leave, a man in the corner recites a short verse without looking up from his candle. "I told the truth once. It didn't fit, so I folded it into a song, and now people hum it without knowing what they've learned." You step outside. The petals underfoot are fragrant with dew. The air smells like a story no one will claim. Asterisk dawn yawns wide over the city, painting everything in gold and mild ambition. You find yourself on the edge of a quiet district where the streets are so narrow, even the sunlight seems to tiptoe in sideways. This morning's visit is to a place whispered about in poetry, but rarely mapped. You're at the scriptorium of unsigned letters. It's not grand, just a modest two-story house with open shutters and ivy growing too enthusiastically up one wall. The only indication you're in the right place is the faint smell of ink, saffron and drying rose petal scents that have lingered here for centuries. Inside, the rooms are filled with desks, some tiny, some shared, all littered with scrolls. In various stages of composition, each scroll is a letter never sent, written in moments of courage or fear, clarity or confusion, never delivered, never signed. You're told gently by a quiet scribe, no reading allowed. The letters are resting, you wander. One letter, half unrolled, reads, "I watched you walk away, but I still set a place for you at dinner." The bowl remains unwashed. Another, folded neatly and tucked under a rose stem. "If I loved you, it was in the spaces between the things I said." And I said many things. A major historical fact floats into focus. In the later years of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's reign, couriers reported a dramatic rise in unsigned letters left intentionally in public places. Some scholars believe these were protest letters disguised as love notes. Others argue they were genuine expressions of emotion in an empire increasingly ruled by ambiguity and poetic diplomacy. Historians still debate whether these letters were part of a coordinated resistance or simply a culturally sanctioned outlet for heartbreak. You find a letter sealed in blue wax. The tag says only, "Unsent due to weather." You don't open it. You respect its privacy. In the back room, there's a long table where visitors are encouraged to write their own unsent letters. Paper, ink, and perfume vials are provided. You choose a vial labeled "Gentle Distance." Your letter reads, "I thought of you today, not with pain, just with cinnamon." You fold the paper. There's a wall where visitors may place their letters, anonymously among the shelves, or burn them if they prefer to let the words go entirely. You do neither. You tuck the letter in your pocket. An obscure tidbit shared by the scribe. There once existed a practice among palace servants of writing fake letters to their future selves. They would scent them with nutmeg and rose, seal them tightly, and hide them in kitchen cabinets or laundry baskets. Years later, if they stumbled upon one, they'd pretend it came from someone wise. Some swore the advice was always correct. Outside, the air is cool and faintly floral. You think about everything you've never said and how, somehow, it still lingers softly, like perfume from a scarf left hanging by the window. The city is quiet, no, not silent, but content. Like it knows you're nearing the end of something and doesn't want to rush you. The wind brushes gently against your face, carrying a hint of clove and warm dust. You follow a path lined with lamps shaped like teardrops, their soft orange glow swaying slightly as if breathing. You're walking to the last place, the place where this journey started before you even knew it had. The room of final sense. It's hidden beneath the oldest part of the palace, beneath the archives, beneath the gardens, beneath even the idea of needing to be seen. No guards, no signs, just a door carved from sandalwood with a small bronze handle shaped like a THUMBPRINT.UNT. Inside the room is small, round, and dim. No furniture, no tapestries, just a single low table at the center and shelves circling the walls. On those shelves rest small clay jars, hundreds, maybe thousands, each one sealed with a soft cotton cloth and a tiny label written in a hand that seems familiar. You realize, slowly, that each jar contains a single scent, nothing more. No stories, no names, just a moment bottled. The caretaker, a very old man with eyes like sleep and hands like poetry nods once, says nothing, just gestures for you to sit. He brings you one jar, it's labeled, for when you didn't know you needed comfort. You open it, the scent is warm linen. Late afternoon sun, a laugh that wasn't directed at you but made you smile anyway. It smells like being near love, even if it isn't yours. You sit for a long time, not thinking, not trying, just breathing. A major historical fact surfaces like a soft tide. After his many campaigns, policies, and philosophical turns, Muhammad bin Tughlaq retired more and more into private reflection. Toward the end of his life, he was rarely seen without a perfumed handkerchief, not for style, but for grounding. He was said to have carried the scent of sweet basil and orange rind to remind him of the marketplace before the crown. Historians still debate whether this was a sign of humility or exhaustion, masquerading as poetry. The caretaker offers you one last jar. This one has no label inside. The scent is ... yours. You don't remember how it was made, but you know it's you. Somehow, a little bit of ink, a thread of firewood. The breath before you answered a hard question. It smells like all the things you never thought would matter, but do. An obscure detail rests gently at the base of the table. A faded inscription reads, "One day, someone will carry you in scent alone." You understand now. You came to this city by story, but you leave it by memory. Not the loud ones, not the historic ones, the quiet ones. You close the jar carefully and return it to the shelf. As you leave the room, the wind does not change, but you do. Outside, the night stretches slowly, wrapping itself around the city like the softest ending. The streets are nearly empty, but not abandoned. They're simply resting, just like the man selling cinnamon bread who finally went home, just like the cat curled up under the poetry wall, dreaming of something slightly too small to catch. You walk, not with purpose now, but with presence, past the street where you first heard the one-stringed instrument, past the garden of partial truths, past the misnamed flowers, the chamber of folded letters, the atrium of unfinished things. Everything you passed is still here, but different now, or maybe you're different. You notice that your clothes carry the scents of the journey rose. Ash, fig leaf, dried ink, faint memory. You smell like a story with a soft middle and no demand to be understood. The final stop isn't a place, it's a moment. You arrive at a quiet rooftop. No one greets you, no music plays, but the stars lean in just a little, as if they've been waiting. You sit. Below, the city sleeps. Above, the sky pretends not to listen, and within you, something settles. A major historical fact whispers like a lullaby. No one truly knows where the Sultan was buried. His tomb was planned, begun, perhaps, even completed. But the site remains unmarked. A king who ruled by contradiction, remembered in absence. Historians still debate whether this was due to oversight or intentional disappearance. But here, in this moment, you realize something else. Perhaps the Sultan was never meant to be found, perhaps, like the scent of a memory. He was only meant to linger. An obscure tidbit arrives in the form of a breeze. It's said that if you breathe deeply at sunrise in this city, you'll inhale part of 1,000 forgotten dreams and carry them with you. Not to keep, just to remember they existed. You breathe in, you don't need to do anything now. No more steps to take, no more jars to open, just breath and stillness. You've reached the quiet core of history, not in battles or borders, but in sandalwood and scrolls, in mismatched tiles and anonymous letters, in regrets too small for records but too large for forgetting. You probably didn't expect to come this far. Then again, you probably didn't expect to smell truth or to write forgiveness in cinnamon. Now, you just rest. And if your eyes are heavy, now, ... let them close. You're not leaving the story. You're becoming part of its scent, forever floating, soft as memory, still as the sky.